The sun burned hot over Lexington Avenue, a wide street where wealth liked to show off under the daylight. And right there, gleaming as if it were forged from liquid silver, sat a Bugatti worth $19 million. Its polished surface reflected the towers above like a mirror of power, a symbol of someone who believed money could silence the world. People passing by slowed their steps, raised their phones, and admired what looked untouchable. Among the crowd, a young man moved differently. His shirt clung to him with stains of engine oil. His jeans were washed thin with time, and his shoes looked like they had traveled far beyond their years. He was not dressed for Lexington Avenue, nor for the glare of that Bugatti. But Adrian Cole did not care about appearances. His shoulders carried the quiet weight of years where his brilliance had been stolen, where his ideas had been paraded by others, while he had been written out of the story. Once a rising star in mechanical engineering, Adrian had been cut out of a startup he helped build, discarded for reasons that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with who he was. He stood now near the Bugatti, and for a moment, instinct guided his hand. His fingers brushed the hot metal of the hood, the way an artist might touch a canvas, not with possession, but with understanding. And that was when a voice split the street. "Don't you dare touch my car." Preston Mercer's words shot across the crowd like a whip. He stepped forward, tailored suit sharp as a blade, face flushed with outrage. Preston was not just any man in the city. He was the CEO of Mercer Dynamics, a name spoken in boardrooms with reverence and fear. But here, in front of cameras and strangers, his pride towered even higher than the glass walls of his company's headquarters behind him. "Do you know who I am?" he barked, his voice swelling with contempt. To him, Adrian was nothing more than a stain on the sidewalk, just another face in the endless city. Preston's rage drew security closer, their eyes flashing toward Adrian as if a crime had been committed. Phones lifted higher, red dots glowed, and suddenly the entire humiliation was being captured by strangers eager for drama. Preston sneered, his voice dropping into a tone that could cut flesh. He called Adrian a nobody, a man who would never understand what a machine like this meant, someone unworthy of standing even a breath away from its paint. His words dripped with the kind of arrogance that comes when a person believes they are untouchable. The street grew still. People wanted to see how Adrian would respond. Would he bow his head, step away, and let the insult consume him? Would he vanish into the crowd, forgotten again like so many times before? But Adrian Cole did not look away. He lifted his head, and his eyes, calm yet cold, locked on Preston. His voice was steady, almost too quiet at first, but it carried through the silence because it was not a cry of anger. It was truth. "This car is about to explode." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words were impossible to ignore. Fingers hovered uncertainly over record buttons. Even Preston, wrapped in his arrogance, faltered for a breath. And in that single moment, the balance shifted. The Bugatti was no longer just a monument of wealth. It became a ticking clock. And Adrian Cole, the man once erased and dismissed, became the only one bold enough to speak what no one else could see. It was a reminder that true value is never worn on a suit or carved into a price tag. Sometimes it comes in oil-stained shirts, in worn-out shoes, in the quiet certainty of someone who knows the truth even when the world calls him small. If you believe that real worth is not in shiny cars or loud titles, but in the courage to speak when others stay silent, then stay with hard stories. Subscribe now and let these stories remind you that dignity cannot be stolen. No matter how many times someone tries to erase it, the words had landed like a spark in dry grass, and for a heartbeat the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Preston Mercer, the man who had just thundered insults, leaned back and let out a laugh that was sharp and cutting. It was not the laugh of someone amused. It was the laugh of a man certain of his superiority, certain that no one, not a stranger in an oil-stained shirt, could ever challenge him. Preston raised his chin, and with all the venom he could gather, he mocked Adrian Cole again. He called him nothing more than a mechanic, and even that word he dressed with cruelty. He spat the label gay mechanic like it were dirt. The crowd shifted, uneasy with the raw prejudice exposed in his tone. Yet cameras kept rolling, because scandal fed hungry eyes. Adrian did not flinch. He moved closer, his hand steady, and without touching the car again, he pointed with precision to the source of danger. He named the flaw in the exhaust system, the valve that had been overlooked in its installation, a weakness hidden beneath polished metal. Every word he spoke was calm, measured, and carried the certainty of someone who understood the rhythm of engines better than most men understood the beating of their own hearts. To prove his words, he reached forward and adjusted the tiniest element with practiced ease. The result was instant. A burst of smoke hissed from beneath the frame, a violent exhale of truth that made bystanders stumble backward. Someone in the crowd shouted, voice high with shock. "He's right! Did you see that?" "He's right!" Phones caught every detail, recording the shift in power as smoke curled into the air. Preston's face drained of its smug confidence. He gestured angrily for his driver, demanding the car be started again, as though sheer willpower could erase what had just been revealed. The driver obeyed, slid behind the wheel, and turned the ignition. Instead of the smooth roar expected from a Bugatti, warning signals blinked across the dash. The sound was sickly, choked, like a throat closing wander strange from. The driver's eyes widened. He climbed out quickly, unwilling to bear the responsibility. The crowd whispered louder, voices overlapping, their eyes turning not to Preston but to Adrian. For the first time, the CEO looked unsettled, as though the ground beneath his feet had betrayed him. Adrian stood tall, his posture unshaken. His voice cut through the noise with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. He told Preston plainly that if he wanted to keep the car from destruction, if he wanted to salvage even a shred of what stood as his symbol of power, he would need to let Adrian work beneath the hood. The scene transformed before everyone's eyes. The man who had been dismissed as a nobody seconds earlier was now the only figure standing between control and chaos. And Preston, with all his fortune and titles, found himself cornered, stripped of certainty. The crowd began to shift in sympathy. They saw not just a man defending his dignity, but someone who carried a quiet authority born from skill, not wealth. And in their silence, there was an acknowledgement that truth is not always dressed in tailored suits, nor does it always arrive with polished shoes. Sometimes it comes in the form of resilience, of the courage to stand unwavering while others laugh. Preston's anger could not erase what had just unfolded. His cruelty hung heavy in the air, exposed before strangers, recorded for the world. And Adrian, oil stains on his shirt and steel in his eyes, had shown that knowledge cannot be mocked into silence. What lingered most on that street was not the shine of a car or the weight of a CEO's name. It was the reminder that arrogance can blind even the powerful, while humility, paired with truth, can turn a forgotten man into the center of gravity. And for those who watched, it was a lesson quietly pressing into their hearts: never underestimate the strength of someone who has been dismissed too many times. Because when such a person speaks, it is often the voice that saves everyone else from disaster. Preston Mercer had always lived in a world where money bent reality, where any mistake could be buried beneath a mountain of influence. But on Lexington Avenue, no fortune could silence what had just been revealed. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air as the Bugatti sat lifeless. Its sleek beauty turned into an emblem of shame. The crowd remained, phones held high, waiting for the next move. They no longer looked at Preston with admiration. Their eyes had shifted to Adrian Cole, the man who had stood unshaken in the storm of insults. Adrian did not waste time savoring the moment. His hands, roughened by years of labor, worked with precision as he leaned over the open hood. To the untrained eye, the interior of the Bugatti was an intricate maze of wires and polished metal, a puzzle meant for specialists behind closed doors. But to Adrian, it was familiar territory, like reading a language he had once spoken fluently. His movements carried the rhythm of someone who knew every weakness of the machine. because once upon a time, he had designed them himself. The crowd watched in silence, broken only by the occasional gasp as Adrian made quick adjustments. He tightened valves, recalibrated a sensor, and reconnected a wire that should never have been left vulnerable. Each action was small but deliberate, carried out with the confidence of a man reclaiming the craft that had been stolen from him. Within minutes, the work was done. Adrian stepped and gave a nod to the driver. The man hesitated, glanced at Preston, then turned the ignition. This time the engine roared to life with the deep, steady sound it had been built for. The vibration filled the street, not with warning, but with power controlled. The transformation was undeniable. Where moments ago the Bugatti had seemed seconds from disaster, now it purred like a predator at rest. Applause broke out around them. Strangers clapped and cheered, their voices echoing between the glass towers. Some called Adrian a genius. Others muttered about justice, about how truth had unfolded in front of their eyes. Preston's face tightened, his lips pressed into a pale line. For once, the CEO had no words, because every excuse had been ripped from him by the sound of his own car running flawlessly. Then came the unexpected turn. A black SUV rolled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the scene. The back door opened with deliberate slowness, and out stepped Arthur Winslow. He was older, with the kind of presence that came not from showmanship, but from years of real authority. Arthur was more than just another name at Mercer Dynamics. He was the largest shareholder, the quiet force who often decided the direction of the empire. The crowd parted instinctively, as though recognizing power when they saw it. Arthur's eyes swept across the scene, taking in the Bugatti, the cameras, the CEO standing pale, and the young man in oil-stained clothes who had just saved the machine. Arthur's voice carried with the ease of someone used to being obeyed, but what he said surprised everyone. "I've been watching the live stream," he declared, his tone calm but firm. "Adrian, you will come with me. We have much to discuss." It was as though lightning had struck. Preston blinked in disbelief, his authority unraveling in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. The shareholders' leader was addressing Adrian directly, bypassing the CEO entirely. The cameras caught every moment, freezing Preston in a position he could never buy his way out of. Arthur did not wait for permission. He gestured, and Adrian, though surprised, followed. The crowd erupted with murmurs, some laughing at the irony, others whispering about how the tables had turned so quickly. Together they entered the grand lobby of Mercer Dynamics, the very building Preston had built to symbolize his dominance. Yet at that moment, it was Adrian who walked through its doors like a man stepping into his rightful place. On the street, Preston stood stranded, silenced in front of witnesses who would carry this story far beyond Lexington Avenue. For once, the empire he thought unshakable seemed fragile, held together not by his arrogance but by the talent of the man he had tried to humiliate. And for those who had been watching closely, there was a lesson blooming beneath the spectacle. A car can shine brighter than the sun, and a CEO can roar louder than the crowd. But neither wealth nor power can erase truth. Skill and integrity, no matter how long ignored, will always surface. Adrian's steady hands had not only restored an engine, they had exposed what happens when talent is dismissed for prejudice. It was a reminder that brilliance denied still carries the power to return, and when it does, it demands to be recognized. The boardroom of Mercer Dynamics was nothing like the case of Lexington Avenue. Here, silence carried weight, broken only by the hum of air conditioning and the faint tick of an ornate clock. Long glass windows framed the city skyline, while a polished mahogany table stretched across the room like a stage for power. At its head sat Arthur Winslow, calm yet commanding, a man whose very presence reminded everyone that money might build a company, but legacy kept it alive. Adrian Cole stood on one side of the table, still wearing the oil-stained shirt that had become a quiet badge of truth. Across from him was Preston Mercer, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming nervously against the arm of his chair. The CEO who once shouted insults in the street now looked cornered, as if walls he had built from arrogance were beginning to close in. Arthur broke the silence first. His tone was not sharp, but it held the gravity of someone who expected answers. He asked Adrian to explain what had happened, not the repair, which the cameras had already captured, but the deeper truth, and Adrian did not hesitate. His voice carried steady, stripped of theatrics, recounting what few in the room had ever known. He revealed how years earlier, he had been part of the original team tasked with designing a groundbreaking engine system, the very framework that had made Mercer Dynamics cars the envy of the market. But then his words deepened. He explained how he had been pushed aside, removed quietly not for lack of ability, but because his identity did not fit the image the company wanted to project. Being openly gay, he said, had been branded a liability, something the company could not showcase in glossy ads or polished investor decks. So his name was erased, his contributions hidden. While others claimed the recognition he had earned, Preston could not contain himself. His voice cracked with fury as he accused Adrian of fabricating the story, of attempting to sabotage the company's reputation out of bitterness. His words rose with desperation, but they rang hollow in a room that had already seen too much evidence. Adrian did not shout back. He simply reminded Preston of what had happened on Lexington Avenue, if not for his intervention. The Bugatti would have exploded before dozens of witnesses, its failure broadcast to every corner of the internet. His statement cut through the noise like steel. "I didn't destroy your empire," Adrian said calmly. "I saved it when you couldn't see past your own pride." Arthur leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his decision was firm. He announced that Adrian's rights as the architect of the engine system would be fully restored. His name would be placed back on the patents, his role reinstated as chief engineer of the program he had birthed. And Preston, the man who had humiliated another in the street and tried to bury truth for years, would be suspended from his position in order to issue a public apology. The words struck the room with finality. Preston sat frozen, his empire slipping through his hands, not because of rivals or markets, but because of his own arrogance. Adrian, however, did not smile in triumph. There was no gloating in his expression. He had not come seeking vengeance. Instead, he stood with the quiet dignity of someone who wanted only to set things right, engines that ran as they were designed, and a history that reflected truth rather than prejudice. When Arthur's gavel of authority fell in that boardroom, it marked more than a corporate correction. It was a reminder to every person present that brilliance cannot be buried indefinitely, and that prejudice always comes with a cost. Adrian's calm resolve showed that true strength lies not in humiliating an enemy, but in holding steady to the truth, even when it has been silenced for years. And so the lesson lingered in the polished air of the boardroom. Arrogance builds walls that eventually collapse, but integrity builds bridges that endure. Adrian had repaired more than a machine, he had restored, a principle that no empire can survive without respect for the people who create its foundation. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation that shook both Lexington Avenue and the walls of Mercer Dynamics. The company's name had been splashed across headlines, not because of its Bugatti or its profits, but because the world had witnessed arrogance exposed and talent redeemed. Inside the headquarters, change was unfolding. Preston Mercer remained under investigation, his silence heavy, while Adrian Cole walked through the corridors not as an outsider but as someone whose place could no longer be denied. The lab doors opened to him once more. The space had been dormant for too long, its tools gathering dust, its purpose forgotten. Yet under Adrian's hands, it stirred back to life. He approached his workbench with the same quiet intensity that had carried him through years of exile. His fingers sketched diagrams, tightened bolts, and breathed life into new prototypes. His name began appearing again on technical papers, on design patents, and on internal memos that once erased him. For the first time in years, the company acknowledged him for what he had always been, the mind behind the engine. One evening, as the sun bled into the city skyline, Arthur Winslow visited the lab. He carried a thick envelope, its contents heavy with legal weight. The formal contract reinstating Adrian as chief architect was inside, along with lucrative benefits and a promise of influence. Arthur placed it on the table with a quiet nod, as if sealing what had already been decided. But Adrian looked at the envelope, then gently pushed it back across the table. His voice was calm but resolute. "I don't need the weight of titles or the comfort of power," he said. "What matters to me is that my work is recognized and that it builds something better than before." Arthur studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod of respect. It was not weakness to refuse power. It was strength to define one's own measure of success. Moments later, the lab doors opened to Guadalupe, but this time it was not executives who entered. A group of young faces stepped inside, students carrying notebooks, sketches, and wide eyes. They were the first recipients of a new scholarship program, created under Adrian's guidance and backed by Arthur's approval. Each one had been chosen for a reason beyond grades. A boy who had been mocked for being openly gay but dreamed of designing machines. A girl dismissed by her teachers because she dared to dream of building engines. A young trans man with ideas too bold for classrooms that only wanted conformity. Adrian welcomed them not with speeches, but with tools placed into their hands. He guided them toward workbenches, encouraging them to shape the future with the imagination the world had tried to strip away. For them, the lab was not just a room, it was a promise that they belonged. In that moment, the twist revealed itself. Adrian's story was never only about reclaiming honor or exposing arrogance. His true victory was transforming his personal redemption into opportunity for others. What he had been denied, he now offered freely, making sure no one else would face the same silence he had endured. And as the engines hummed and laughter filled the once empty lab, the lesson became clear. Wealth can buy cars, buildings, and contracts, but it cannot buy vision. True power lies in using knowledge not to elevate one's name alone, but to lift others who have been forced to the margins. Adrian had repaired more than a Bugatti. He had repaired the cycle of exclusion, turning injustice into a doorway for those who would come after him. So now, the question is for you: if you had the chance to stand where Adrian stood, would you choose to hoard the victory for yourself or open the door for those still waiting outside? Tell us in the comments, because your voice matters as much as his. And if you believe stories like Adrian's deserve to be heard, subscribe to Heart Stories right now. Join us, because the next story may just change how you see the world.